Are you more angry at reality than you are willing to change yourself? Because if that's the case, you're doomed to lead a pretty miserable life. Deep down, we all know that when somebody says that they can fix all your problems, it's just garbage.
Right.
And which is also one of the other messages that I think my dad and my parents inculcated, which is, if you've got a problem, the proper order is that you first look within and see if you can solve it yourself,
Yeah.
right? That accepting that my parents weren't the type of people where if we had a problem at school, they blamed the teacher. Right? Their first question was, okay, did you do it?
Right.
And
How can you change it? How can you respond differently to it? Yeah.
And this is my pet peeve with people I deal with in family, friends, society, is if a good piece of advice is given to you, do you ignore the advice? Do you fight against reality? Are you more angry at reality than you are willing to change yourself? Because if that's the case, you're doomed to lead a pretty miserable life, because reality is not changing. Now, that doesn't mean there are certain social circumstances that we can't all work together to change. But if you're running smack into certain baseline realities, such as some people are smarter and some people are not as smart, and some people earn more money and some people earn less money, and you're living in a free society, and you're running into reality like, I made a bunch of bad decisions in my life, and now I'm poorer than I otherwise would be. Or I made a bunch
of those decisions.
Because of those decisions. That ain't society's fault. Maybe you ought
it's
to
not the government's fault.
That's right. Maybe you ought to get your stuff together.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a joke going around that if I were to run for president, my slogan would have been "Solve your own problems," because for every politician, it's I'm going to solve your problems, and this is something I despise on all sides of the aisle. Right? I think that President Trump's taken an example, campaigned on the basis that you have a dying factory town. It's been dying because technology is ripping away those jobs, and because the market doesn't help create new jobs in this particular area. Well, we're not going to say that you should leave your town and go to a different town where the jobs are and treat your life as an adventure and go forth. Instead, we're going to say, no, we're going to bring those jobs back because it's the Mexican and the Chinese who stole those jobs. That's nonsense. Okay, and when you hear the same thing from politicians like Elizabeth Warren, who recently spoke at a historically black college, and she said to a group of black students that America is inevitably stacked against you. And I'm thinking, these are people going to a top-level college who majored in probably useful things and will get a job after that major. No, I mean, it's one thing to say that I can cite a specific example of somebody who has discriminated against me, done something bad, here's a specific law that disadvantages me. If you're solutions focused, then you should be asking, okay, what is the problem and what is the solution? But I think that we as a country and just generally human beings, we're oriented toward being problem focused, meaning that something bad happens and we think, okay, how can we complain about this problem? How can we blame this problem on somebody who's not me? As opposed to, okay, how can we solve this problem? How can we
take ownership? Yeah.
How can we do something about it? And you know, my wife and I have a basic rule that this applies in relationships also. So my wife and I have a basic rule that came up very early in our marriage. So my wife was a lovely person, and as my listeners know, a doctor. She is she does a thing that I think many women do, and she will want to talk to me about a problem. And as a man, my first instinct is, okay, here's what we should do.
Let's fix it, yeah.
And she gets pissed, right? Because she doesn't actually want the problem solved. She just wants to talk to me about the problem because it makes her feel better. Why can't you listen more? Why can't? And so I said to her, that's fine, but I need to know up front in the conversation, is this a problem-solving conversation?
Right.
Or is this a me hearing you conversation?
Yes, tell me so you understand.
Right, so this is an actual rule in our house. That when we start addressing a problem, I'll say to her, and she doesn't get offended because she's awesome, I'll say to her, is this a you want me to give you a solution problem, or is this a you just want me to listen to you? And very often she'll say, I just want you to listen.
Great.
It's like, okay, good, now I know. Because what's the worst for guys is you say, right, so here's the problem, and here's 3 ways you can solve it. And she's like, what are you talking about? Why are you? So I think that's true in politics also.
Yeah.
We mix up what it is that we want out of our politicians. We pretend that what we want out of our politicians is solutions. What we actually want out of our politicians is sympathy. The problem is that sympathy does not create solutions.
Right.
Sympathy is just a way for people to pander to you for votes and money. Sympathy, like, you should be viewing your politicians like you view your plumbers. Do they solve the problem? You shouldn't be viewing them like, right, you shouldn't be viewing them like you view your psychotherapist. Do they hear me? Do they listen to me?
Wow. You know, it's interesting because about 10 years ago, I was playing professional football, kind of like minor league football. I was getting $250 a week, so it wasn't like I was making a lot of money. But I was doing what I loved. And I got injured, and I was sleeping on my sister's couch for about 1.5 years afterwards. I didn't have a college degree yet. This was in 2008 when the economy was pretty bad, and people with degrees weren't even getting jobs. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, how am I going to get out of this? And can someone help me out? And this is going to be a struggle. You know, I was thinking like, there's got to be a better way for people like me who can get taken care of. And then I realized after my sister lovingly kicked me off her couch after a year and a half. She was like, you need to start either paying rent, get a good job, do something. I remember saying, okay, what if I could solve this problem? As opposed to being a victim to society, what happened to me or whatever, what if I could solve this problem and be in complete ownership of every decision I've made up to here? And I think one of the reasons I don't follow politics or watch the news or do any of that stuff is because I try to instill what you talked about with people on this show, which is like, how do we overcome our own challenges by not putting the blame on someone else, by not hoping for someone else to save us or rescue us or to give us a higher minimum wage or whatever it may be, but how can we develop skills with the society we're in? How can we develop new skills, be more valuable to society so that we can earn more? How can we take care of our health better so we're not sick and needing medicine or someone to supplement that through whatever it may be, some financial aid through medicine? How can we just take care of our lives better and improve the quality of our life? And I think when we can focus more on improving the quality of our lives, the political things don't really matter as much.
Well, this is right.
Like what's happening in the world doesn't matter.
What John Adams said, and I think this is right, is that the Constitution of the United States, and what he meant by this is freedom, is really only built for moral and religious people. What he meant by that really is that if you've got a group of people who are waiting around for somebody else to save them externally, you can't have a system where even we can take care of each other, right? There are going to be situations in which the community needs to come together and take care of people who legitimately can't take care of themselves or are going through a rough stretch. Understood. All that's right. But if you don't have a group of people who are motivated not to take advantage of that, or who are not being told by politicians that they should be taking advantage of it, or that society has a duty, why don't we focus on our own duties more than we focus on everybody else's duties to us? We focus a lot on rights in our society. We have a right to X, Y, and Z. We focus very little on what are our duties to ourselves and to society. And that doesn't make us happier, it makes us more depressed.
What's the difference between rights and duties?
So rights are, there are a couple different visions of rights, and I think that this is where we actually get political. So I think that there are two different visions of rights. According to people on the right, on conservatives, what rights are things that you have a right to do X without government controlling you. So basically these are called negative rights. This is the parlance that's sort of used, is that you have a right against the government. So for example, I have a right to free speech. What that really means is the government does not have the ability to compel me to speak in a certain way. Or
no matter what I say.
Right.
Anything at all.
Right.
Even threats or...
Well, not threats, because that's actual assault, but anything that's not indicating violence, for example.
Gotcha.
I have a right to say, because the government does not have the power to encroach upon that.
So when someone grabs you by the throat and says you're going to be in an ambulance if you keep speaking,
right? That's
like that happens.
That's illegal. Yeah, that's actually a violation of the law. But me saying something that offended that person is not a violation of the law, right? And the government can't compel that. So the idea for people who believe in sort of traditional constitutional freedoms is that the Bill of Rights is an expression of a bunch of negative rights for the most part. Things where right to freedom of religion means the government can't impose upon you. Things that would exist in what John Locke would call a state of nature. That if there were no government, you just lived in a community with your families or whatever, that the government wouldn't be there to impose things on you. So what would you have without the government imposing anything on you? So right to bear arms is the government does not have the right to take away your arms. Now what people on the left have said is that those rights are not sufficient. You need actual material goods to provide you with a sense of well-being sufficient that you can lead a happy life. So for example, a right to health care. That's something that we have to force somebody to provide for you, whether it's through taxation or forcing a doctor to take care of you. A right to health care is an affirmative duty on someone else. A right to free speech is an affirmative duty. If I'm just sitting here, I have a right to free speech. Have I forced you to do anything? The answer is no. If I have a right to health care and I get hurt, now I have to compel somebody to provide that health care for me, right? Because I have a right to it, which means that it doesn't matter. If I'm just sitting here, the health care doesn't just arrive. There has to be a doctor qualified to take care of me, and if that doctor doesn't want to take care of me, he has to be forced to take care of me, or she has to be forced to take care of me. So that's true for rights to health care, right to education, right to any of the right to housing, many of the rights that folks on the left cite. So when I say rights versus duties, this applies broadly to virtually all rights, but particularly it's important for people who believe in a positive version of rights. So the right to free speech comes along with the duty. If you want to have a functioning society is what I'm talking about. The right to free speech comes along with a duty not to be a generalized jackass. Because if you do that, it wrecks the social fabric. Right? So if you're just going around, like I believe that you have a right to call somebody an ethnic slur. You do, you have a right, it's not illegal. If you do it,
it's a right, but it's not a.
It's a bad thing to do, right? It's a wrong. It's a right, but it's a wrong. Like you can be wrong in your use of rights. People do it all the time. People do stuff I don't approve of all the time. That's legal. That's good. I'm glad it's legal. But if people act like jackasses within the bounds of their rights all the time, there's no social fabric. We can't live together, right?
If you're just offending people all day long, then what's the point of being here?
Right, exactly. And if the offense comes with a point, as in we actually have to have a substantive conversation, that's one thing. This is a conversation I had a lot during 2016 about President Trump, and also a conversation I had about a couple of folks who are kind of alt-right in like Milo Yiannopoulos, for example, is they would say things that were deliberately taboo just to say, I want to say something that's taboo because we have to break political correctness. And what I said was, political correctness is only bad if it's trying to bar speech that is valuable, meaning that if there's a politically correct taboo against using the N-word, agree, very bad to use the N-word, no one should use the N-word. I'm not going to say the N-word just to violate the politically correct taboo because it's bad to say the N-word. But if you're going to tell me that political correctness says that I am no longer allowed to say that male and female are biological categories, that's a valuable thing that has ramifications for society, there I'm anti-political correctness. So that's an example of you have a right to say bad things, but you shouldn't do them just to be a jerk.
Yeah.
The same thing holds true when it comes to positive rights, and I think the left has failed to recognize this, particularly when they cite, for example, the Nordic countries. They'll say, well, there's a right to health care. Okay, let's assume that you're right. I disagree. I don't think there's a right to health care. I don't think you can compel somebody else to provide your health care. I think that's wrong. But let's take your point of view for a second, that there's a right to health care. Well, this should come along with a consonant duty to take care of yourself. So if you're
smoking and drinking and never move your body and you're eating junk food all day, then you're not taking care of yourself first.
Right, and then you are throwing the obligations, the externalities onto this entire other group of people. Well,
to save you.
Right, and one of the reasons that you've been able to support, practically speaking, a larger social welfare state in places like the Nordic countries that Bernie Sanders likes, I'm not a Sanders fan, but places like Sweden or Norway or Denmark, is because they have a very strong social fabric where everybody is
active,
people know their neighbors, they feel an obligation. Like, to take an example,
they help each other.
Right, you saw Cinderella Man, so the movie with Russell Crowe.
I didn't see it.
Oh, you didn't see it? Okay, with James J. Braddock. Okay, so James J. Braddock is this champion boxer who rises from being basically on welfare, right?
Yes.
So you remember there's a scene in it where he's been on the welfare rolls, and now he's the champion of the world, right? And he goes back into the welfare office with a roll of cash, and he hands it back to the welfare agent. Well, and they say, well, you don't have to do that. He says, no, I do have to do that because that's a duty that I owe to you, right? I no longer need the welfare.
Right.
Right.
It wasn't his right. It was a duty.
Right. It's a duty for me to bring that cash back to you. That's something that I think Americans have lost, and it's something that also happens in the context of government taking care of us, because the government is by nature faceless. The government is a barrier between you and your fellow citizen. When you get a check from the government, you tend to think, the government, it's what's giving me the check. The government doesn't have any cash-providing auspices of its own. The government is taking money from another human. Well, we don't think about that way in our churches or synagogues, right? Like, I belong to a synagogue. When somebody in our community has a financial problem, we all get together and we contribute to the person via the rabbi. He'll go to the rabbi will come to us and say, this person is having a rough month, we need to pay his rent, can we all get together and do that? Well, that's good in the sense that this person knows who exactly is giving him the money, and he feels an obligation to all those people not to mooch off of them because we all share a community together. Well, that sort of social fabric has to exist. That feeling of obligation has to exist if we are to have functioning rights in the first place. And that includes people who believe that you have a right to other people's stuff.
If you want to learn more about how to master your mind, check out this next video right here.
We're all faced with great opportunities brilliantly disguised as impossible situations, and we are at that point, at that nexus point in our evolution as a species. So then you don't try to fix that. That's never going to work. What you do